Hey YouTube, Ed here with Jack of All Trades, and welcome to another video. So I got my cup of coffee going this morning, and today what we're going to do is we are going to review and test YesWelder's new machine, the Firstess MP200. This is a multi-process machine. It will do 5 different welding operations and includes plasma cutting, which is awesome. You got all the welder and a plasma cutter all in one package. So let's go ahead and let's get this video started, and let's talk about the MP200 by YesWelder. Welcome back. So yes, YesWelder has come up with a new machine. It's the Firstess MP200 or MP200. So what is this machine? It's a multi-process machine. It's a 5-function machine. Basically, it'll do 4 different welding functions and is a plasma cutter. Fun. I mean, you no longer need to have a second box for your plasma cutting operations. So what are the four welding processes you can do? Well, you can do MIG, and you can do both types of MIG. You can do MIG with hard wire and gas, or you can do flux core wire. So that's 2. You can do stick welding with this thing. That's 3. You can also TIG weld with this. That's 4 welding processes. The TIG welding is lift start or scratch start, I like to call it, because that's kind of what it is. You have to scratch the tungsten to get it started. But it is a TIG function, and it's no different than my Titanium Unlimited 200 in that respect, except my Titanium doesn't have a plasma cutter in it. I'm really excited about this machine, and I'm actually really hoping it works well, because wow, what a fantastic package to have all in one grouping. So with that, let's go ahead and let's talk about some specifications. All right, before we get too deep into this review and test, I just want to let you know this video is going to get quite long. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put timestamps down in the description, which will allow you to navigate using the slider bar or those timestamps to go to various spots in the video, so you can maybe just skip around and you can look at the things that you want to look at, or of course watch the whole video in its entirety, and then you can use that to reference back later. But unfortunately there's a lot to unpack here, and this video is probably going to be the better part of an hour when it gets all said and done. So I just want to let you know I will put timestamps down in the description, which will help you to navigate through the video. With that all being said, let's go ahead and let's get into this machine. All right, this machine is 110 or 220 capable, and it's smart, so you don't have to flip a switch or anything like that. You just either plug it into a 110 outlet or you plug it into a 220 outlet, and the machine is smart enough to know what voltage you're hooked up to, and it will adjust accordingly. You just have to turn the machine off before you change what voltages you're going to use. And on 220 volts, it will supply up to 200 amps of welding current. On 110 volt, it will supply up to 160 amps of welding. So there is some limitations under 110, but in reality, most people don't need much more than 160 on their welding, because that's some pretty thick material. Or with 220 volts, you can get 200 amps of welding, which would be very suitable for a lot of different kinds of job shops, body shops, things of that effect. I would not say this is a industrial welder. It probably wouldn't handle the rigors and the tortures of industrial welding settings, but something like a body shop, a small engine shop, or even a small fabrication shop, this would probably work really, really well. Duty cycle. So if you're running it wide open and 220 volts at 200 amps, you got a 60% duty cycle. Likewise, at 110 volts, if you're running at a maximum of 160 amps, you have a 60% duty cycle. Now, if you bump that down, say you're at 110 volt and you're only welding at 120 amps, you got 100% on your duty cycle. Likewise, in 220 volt, if you bump it down to about 150 to 155, again, you've got 200 amps or 100% of duty cycle. So the duty cycle on this machine is really good. On the air compressor, they do recommend you have a 9 to 12 CFM recovery on your air compressor. running at about 78 psi. I don't know of too many guys who have got a garage air compressor that is capable of that. I've had other plasma cutters and I've hooked them up to my really small, inadequate air compressor. And when I say really small, it's a 15-gallon air compressor that's running a diaphragm pump on it. It'll cut. I just have to wait for recovery quite often. As long as I'm not doing a lot of cutting, it'll catch up. So that's just some specifics on it. The unit itself weighs about 28.5, 29 pounds, so it's fairly light. You can see it's not horribly big, so it's extremely portable. Now let's relocate the camera a little bit and let's talk about what you get with the machine. Okay, what do you get in the box? Well, obviously, besides the fact that you get the welder in the box, you do get some various things. You know me, I hate unboxings. I'm not going to do an unboxing. So let's just get right into it. The first thing you're going to see is you're going to get a quick startup guide. There's an extra roller in here for flux core welding, and it does take a different roller for flux core welding as opposed to using hardwire. And they give you some consumables for the plasma cutting operation. Fun little tidbit on the Cut 55 DS, the consumables on that plasma cutter are actually proprietary. You can only get those from YesWelder. I have not been able to find them anywhere else, but then again, I really haven't looked too hard either. But YesWelder does tell me that they're proprietary. These are not. The consumables for this machine are actually very much the same as some of the ESOP parts, and they even tell you that in the user's guide. So neat thing, I did go on Amazon, and you can buy consumables for the plasma cutter on Amazon. So really happy that they went ahead and did that. That way you have a better opportunity to find the consumables that you need and get them in a fairly quick manner. You also get some consumables for TIG welding. You get pretty much everything you need for TIG welding with the exception of the gas and the tungstens and the filler rods. So they give you the basic consumable kit for TIG welding. This is a very basic consumable kit. I would highly recommend that if you're going to TIG weld, that you get some clear glass cups. And we're going to talk more about TIG welding here in a second, because that's the next thing I'm going to pull out of this pile, is the TIG torch. Now, admittedly, I'm a crappy TIG welder. I do not have the experience and I do not have the skill to TIG weld. So I'm not going to get real in depth on TIG welding. You do get a TIG torch. It is a scratch start. It's not a high frequency start TIG welder, but you do get a TIG welder, and it's very similar to the TIG welding torch on my titanium. I'm just not going to get real in depth on it for two reasons. One, I'm just about out of pure argon. I don't have a whole lot left. And two, I suck at it bad enough where I'm not going to insult your intelligence and make you think that I'm any kind of a TIG welder. Last time I tried TIG welding, it just didn't end well. So I'm going to leave the TIG welding up to somebody who's a little more experienced. But you do get a TIG torch, and you do get everything you need to start TIG welding, except the tungstens, the filler rods, and the pure argon gas. Plasma cutting torch. You also get a plasma cutting torch. Doesn't do you a whole lot of good to give you a machine that can do plasma cutting if they don't give you the torch. This torch is actually very reminiscent of my Cut 55 DS. Same kind of style. They've got the plastic safety on here. It's a nice big torch. It fills up my hand pretty good. The trigger is easy to find, or big and easy to find. Should be no problem using it with gloved hands. And like I said, the consumables are no longer proprietary towards YesWelder, so that way you can go ahead and you can order those right on Amazon, which is very nice, and it gives you some more options for consumables. Like my Cut 55 DS, the cover on the plasma cutter is pretty light duty. I'd probably, if I'm going to keep this machine, I would probably go ahead and put a leather sleeve right on top of it, because this little rubber vinyl coating they put on here just really isn't going to stop much. But the gun itself is actually pretty nice. They've got decent strain relief right here on the end of the gun, which is great. They don't have any strain relief on the welder end of it, but you really shouldn't need it. The connections, just like the Cut 55 DS, they give you the hand tightening nut on here, which means you don't need tools to connect this up to the machine, and of course the electrical connector for the plasma cutter. Overall, that's a pretty nice quality gun. So the MIG torch. So, okay, the MIG torch is actually about the same size as the plasma torch. Some minor little differences, but it's physically feels much the same. Again, a nice big trigger, easy to find with gloves. Nice. It uses your standard Tweako Mini style connections, so or consumables. So you should be able to buy these consumables pretty much anywhere that you can buy consumables for these small welders. It's got this Euro style connector on here, which makes connecting it to the welder extremely easy. I also noticed that on the YesWelder website, you have the ability to replace these. They do have replacements, which is very, very nice with this Euro style connector. So if you do damage or wreck your gun, you can actually replace it, which something nice that you can't say about the titanium machines is finding parts for these seems to be a little easier on the YesWelder website. So they do support replacement parts. Now I haven't gone in to see about liners or anything of that effect, and I haven't taken the gun apart at all to see what the liner looks like or if it's even replaceable. So nice gun, nice MIG torch. It should work really well. It's well built. It's got a metal strain relief right here, which is really nice. And you know, the cable is fairly flexible, and it's just a well constructed MIG torch, and it's actually, I like it much better than the MIG torch for my titanium. It's a little bigger, it fills up my hand a little better, and my titanium MIG torch just seems like it's a little bit lighter duty. Stick stinger. It's just your garden variety stick stinger. It's nothing super special or anything to write home to mom about. It's your garden variety stick stinger that you'd find on any other of these smaller portable welders. And there's really not much you can say about it as far as ergonomics or anything else. And I'm not displeased with the fit and finish of the stinger, and it looks like it'll work just fine. Ground clamp. Again, nothing really to write home about on this. It is just a ground clamp. We're not talking about rocket surgery here. The clamp itself, admittedly, is pretty light. This is a pretty light duty clamp. This is certainly not an industrial grade clamp. However, they did put the jumper strap in here, which is nice. And you really need to have that with any welding clamp. Otherwise, you get arcing in the hinge right here, and that causes some problems as far as the functionality and heat and other things like that. But admittedly, it is a pretty light duty clamp. There's not a whole lot of jaw pressure there. It's not uncomfortable to clamp it onto my fingers. So yeah, it's just a pretty light duty clamp. But again, for a relatively inexpensive portable welder, that's kind of what I would expect. I am sure that in a few years down the road of using this machine, I'm probably going to have to replace that clamp at some point in time. And that's really not the end of the world. All right, the final thing you get in the box is all your hoses and cabling and stuff like that. Now, the power cord is quite obviously it's hooked up to the machine already. You don't have to do anything here. Fun little thing. YesWelder did go ahead and put a 220 plug right on the end of the cable. You remember on my Cut 55 DS video, I was less than impressed that they had a 110 plug on the end of this, and it went from 110 to 220, and I explained why in that video. YesWelder went ahead and they listened, and they put a 220 plug right on the end of the cable like they're supposed to, and that is fantastic. I'm so glad they went ahead and did that. In turn, they also give you the adapter that you need to go from 220 to 110. And again, like I said, this machine is smart enough to know the difference, so you don't have to do anything except plug this in, plug it into a 110 outlet, turn it on, and you're welding. They also give you the gas line that you need to hook up your CO2 or your argon tank for welding. Again, nice and flexible. They give you plenty of length here. The fittings seem like they're pretty decent. The crimps look like they're all right. I don't see that there's going to be any problems with this, and it is just a gas line, so we should have no problems with this whatsoever. And finally, the last thing you get is you get everything you need to set the machine up for plasma cutting. You get all the hoses, you get the gauge, you get the regulator, you get the bracket to mount it to the back of the machine. They even go so far as to give you the hose clamps. So they give you everything you need, with the exception of the end fittings for the end of the hose. They do not give you these fittings. And I understand why they don't give you these fittings. They don't give you these fittings because everybody's got a different concept of how they want to hook this up to their air supply. There's a couple of ways you could do it. You could actually just take one of your air hose connectors and you could actually screw it into the side of the regulator if you wanted to. I opted to get another barbed nipple, shove it into the hose and hold it down with a hose clamp and add my air fitting onto the end of that. So I got some extra hose length with my machine, which should be really, really nice. I could actually plug this directly into my air compressor if I wanted to. So they just don't give you this, and that's not a barn burner. You're talking about $5 at your local hardware store. So it would have been, I guess, kind of nice if they would have supplied the nipple end with the threads on it, but there again, everybody's got a different air compressor fitting. So not a big deal. Just understand that along with the regulator, you're going to have to buy some fittings for the end of your plasma cutter hose. So one thing I forgot to mention while I was making the video was that you do not get an argon CO2 regulator with this machine. So if you're going to MIG weld using hardwire and gas, you are going to need to pick up a regulator. Now, you can get one from YesWelder. They're about $35 and it looks like a very basic regulator. I have no information on it other than the fact that they have it. Or you can pick one up from your local welding supply store. I actually picked my regulator up from Harbor Freight. It cost me $69.99, and it seems like a pretty stout, good regulator. All right, let's talk a little bit about fit and finish of this machine. First and foremost, I'm going to say this right off the bat. This thing's sexy. It's pretty. They really did a nice job. I really like the black color scheme on it. Way better than that baby blue color that they were using. I just really like the way the machine looks. I mean, it's just sharp. It is just a sharp looking machine. Fit and finish, the paint on it is great. I see no flaws. They did a really nice job of putting this thing together. The design team did a great job of designing a very nice, modern looking machine. And the overall fit and finish of the machine it seems to be very, very nice. So from front to back, we still have this plastic cover on the front here, just like on my Cut 55 DS. It's a little bit light, but I think it'll be okay as long as you're careful with it. You just can't beat this thing up. And I know how welders are. Welders are not oftentimes easy on equipment, but you need to have some kind of a cover here to protect the controls on the front of it and to protect the screen. Now they did it's kind of a dual layer of protection. You have this cover here, and then there's a light membrane which covers the screen itself, and then the screen is inset behind that membrane there. So they do have a dual layer protection on here, but this isn't going to stop much as far as sparks and slag and things go. So you're going to want to keep that cover down when you're actually operating the machine. So on the front of the machine, if we lift the plastic cover up, you can see we've got some very basic controls here. We've got two knobs. Those knobs are push button knobs. We've also got a membrane switch for the home button right here, and we'll go over the functions of the menus here in a little bit. You have all the connections you need on the front of the machine to hook up your MIG gun, your TIG torch, your ground clamp, depending on if you're electrode positive or electrode negative. You have the connector here for your plasma cutter control, and you have the connector here for the plasma cutting air, which is underneath the spring-loaded cover. Don't know how long that's going to last, but we'll see. It seems like it's a little light, but once it's hooked up, you shouldn't ever have to deal with it. The handle on the machine is extremely solid and very, very nice. I've carried it with the handle, and it doesn't seem to be a problem. One thing I really like about this is the side door for loading the wire. It's a down-fold door, whereas on my titanium, it's an up-fold door. I much prefer to have a down-fold door. That way there's no chance that it's going to fall down and hit you on the head. As far as the wire spools, you can put up to a 10-pound spool on here, which is no different than anybody else. Looking at the wire feeder, interesting enough, when I look at this wire feeder as compared to the wire feeder on my titanium welder, and here's a side-by-side for you to look at them. They're identical. There is no difference between this wire feeder and the wire feeder on my titanium. No difference. It is the exact same wire feeding mechanism. So interestingly enough, YesWelder is using the same parts as others, and I bet you if we went ahead and looked at maybe a Lincoln or a Miller or an ESAB, I bet you those guys, at least one of them, are probably using the same wire feeder. This is an interesting portion right here that is definitely different than my titanium, and it's a polarity bus bar. Now, why is this here? When you're welding in MIG with hardwire and gas, you need to be what's called a positive electrode polarity, or an electrode positive polarity, however you want to call it. It's DCEP, positive. DC, electric, positive. And this bus bar needs to go from this negative terminal to this positive terminal for regular MIG welding with 75-25 gas. If you are welding flux core, you need to be DC electrode negative. And that means you have to take this bus bar and you have to loosen it from this screw, flip it over, and hook it up to this screw so that these two connections here are connected, and that gives you DC electric negative current, and that's what you need for flux core welding. In turn, when you're flux core welding, since you're DC electrode negative, you need to put your ground clamp in the positive, and I believe that's positive, it is, in the positive side of the ground clamp, not the negative. When you're running in MIG with gas and hardwire and you've got that bus bar flipped, you need to be on the negative side. So one thing that this machine does not have that my titanium welder does have, and that's spool gun capability. This machine is not set up to run with a spool gun, i.e., it's not set up to run with aluminum. And for me, that's really not an issue for me, because I hate working with aluminum. But this machine does not have aluminum or spool gun capability. All right, so that's everything you get in the box. Now, what I am not going to do in this video is I'm not going to show you how to put all this together. There's already a couple of videos out on YouTube on how to assemble this machine, and quite frankly, I'm not going to sit here and insult your intelligence, because it is so easy to put this thing together, it's not even funny. And the user's guide that YesWelder gives you online is actually very, very good, and I will provide a link to that user's guide in the description down below. You're not going to have a problem setting this thing up. It doesn't require any fancy tools. You don't have to cut anything. You just basically have to put it together. Super simple. And like I said, I am not going to insult your intelligence by showing you how to put this thing together, because it is so dumb easy. It's not even funny. So let's go ahead and let's get this thing set up and let's start doing some welding with it. All right, what we're going to do is we're just going to take you basically through some of the menu settings and help you navigate through the menu. Now, one of the things that YesWelder recommends is before you turn the machine on is that you actually have the cables and things like that hooked up for welding processes. They don't want you to turn the machine on unless you have things hooked up. So we've got some stuff hooked up to it, and we're ready to go ahead and turn it on. So we just reach back behind the machine here and hit the switch and allow it to turn on. Now it comes up with some really cute little animation here for YesWelder. And it brings you up to the last screen that you were on. So the last screen that I was on, I was messing around with the plasma cutter, and that's the last screen it's going to take me to. So now you've got three basic controls on here. You've got a home button, you've got a select button, and that's actually this knob. You push in on the knob, and then you have what's a back button on this knob. It's the same thing. It's a push in. So let's just go ahead and let's take you right to the home button. And we'll start off on here, and here's your settings button. And your settings button doesn't do anything more than it allows you to select inches, millimeters, or to do a factory reset. Now, I did read in the user's guide that the factory reset is for if you've got the welder acting kind of funny or hinky or weird, you can go ahead and you can do the factory reset, and it'll bring everything right back to the factory settings, kind of like resetting your phone. We're going to go ahead and select inches because I'm in America and we use inches here. So I go ahead and select inches. It's loading, and success. Okay, so let's go back to the home button. Turn the knob. The next thing we can play with here is the stick settings. We'll hit the select button again. All we can really change here is the amperage. It's at 110 volts, and since we are plugged into 110, the maximum amperage I can use is 160. It'll only let me take it to 160. If I was plugged into 220, it'll let me go to 200 amps. If I push the select button here, you can see it highlights up here on the menu. And then I push the select button again, and now it allows me to select my electrode type. I can either have 70 series or 60 series. I happen to have 60 series rods, so we're going to select 60 series. If I scroll over to the next setting, that's your electrode diameter. We can either have 1/8 inch, 3/32 inch, or 5/32 inch. So we can select our electrode diameter, and then the next setting over is for memories. You can actually program this machine to have up to 10 different memory settings. So I'm not going to mess with that. I'm going to let you guys do that for the sake of time. I'm just going to try and fly through these fairly quickly. If I go back to the home screen again, now I can set up for my MIG settings. Now this has got a lot of stuff that you can do here, but it's not complicated. Now this knob here will let you to set your voltage manually and independently of everything else. This knob will allow you to set your wire speed, and it also adjusts your amperage accordingly, and it adjusts them together. So that's what the two knobs do independently. Now if I push on the select knob, you can see once again it highlights up here, and I can select again. This is what lets me select what kind of gas I'm using. I'm either using 100% argon, an 80-20 mix of argon and CO2, 75-25 of argon and CO2, or 100% CO2. So I happen to have 75-25. That's what we're going to grab, and that's probably going to be the most common. So then if we scroll over one, the wire selector, it allows you to select steel or stainless. We're going to select steel because that's what we have. If we push it again, it allows you to select your wire diameter. I have 035 wire, so that's what we're going to select. It also has the 2T, 4T function on here. This is not for TIG welding. So before anybody in the comments says this is for TIG welding, no, it's not. It's for MIG welding on this machine. It's not for TIG welding on this machine because we do not have a high frequency start. It's a scratch start. If we had a pedal or high frequency start, 2T, 4T would also apply to TIG welding. The next one over is your material thickness. Now this is kind of nice, especially if you're a beginner welder. The material thickness, it'll automatically set your wire speed and your amps for you. So say you're running 1/4 inch material, you just select 1/4 inch. It automatically tells you need 140 amps at 17 on your wire speed. And if you select that, 140 amps with 15 on your wire speed, and if you select that, it automatically sets everything. And then you can adjust your voltages manually with this knob. So it does have some basic settings already in here for your material thickness, which is, like I said, it's really nice for a beginner welder. Now, being as we're only plugged into 110, it'll only take us up to 160 amps or 5/16 steel, 3/8 and 1/2 inch. They're saying it requires 220 volts to weld that in a single pass. So let's go back down to 1/4 inch. Actually, let's go to 3/16. That's probably what we'll weld. If I go over to the next setting here, this allows you to set your burn back. And if we go over to this setting here, that also allows you to set your memory. Again, one of 10 memories. You can only have 10 in there at one time. So let's go ahead and select again. This is for core wire or flux core wire welding. If we hit select, much the same as the MIG welding, the big differences here is it only allows you to select steel in your wire type, and your gas settings are quite obviously gone because we don't have gas. Otherwise, the controls are all basically the same. We go to the TIG settings. TIG is very, very basic. It only allows you to set your amperage. Once again, we are in 110, so we can only take it up to 160 amps. And finally, plasma cutting. Once again, plasma cutting, the only thing we can set is the amps, and plugged into 110, our maximum amperage is 30 amps. In 220, our maximum amperage is 40 amps. We do have some menu selections here. This is your post or your pre-flow, excuse me. This allows you to set how many seconds worth of air you want to have come out of the gun before it actually strikes the arc to start cutting. So that's your pre-flow. Your next setting over is your post-flow. This is basically you set it up for gun cooling. I always kind of go with maximum post-flow, 9-10 seconds worth of post-flow, and that helps keep your gun cool and it helps cool your gun down. This also has 2T and 4T function for your plasma cutting, which is very nice if you're doing long cuts, if you've got an air compressor that can handle that kind of air capacity. And again, we have a memory setting capability on the plasma cutting. So that's basically the settings menu and everything that you can do in the settings. It's very easy to navigate, very easy to use, and if a Polak like me from North Dakota can figure out how to set this machine, anybody can do it. It's very, very simple, very intuitive, and just really easy to navigate. There should be no problems. All right, so we're out in my other shop. We're going to test this thing out on the plasma cutter. I'm not going to use my microphone because the welder actually creates some interference with my wireless microphone and it makes some staticky stuff, so we're going to go without the microphone. I apologize for that. But I've basically got 4 thicknesses of steel here. I've got some 1/2 inch, I've got some 1/4, I've got some 3/16, and I've got some 1/8 inch steel. That's all I've got laying around, and so we'll cut some of this up today. But we'll try the plasma cutter on both 110 and 220. So these first few cuts are going to be of the 110 and the remainder will be of 220. So let's go ahead and let's start cutting up and see how this thing works. Okay, I've got it set up here on 110 and we're running 30 amps. Let's see how it cuts this piece of 1/8 inch. And as you can see, 1/8 inch material has no chance whatsoever. It just flies right through it. Here we are again. You can hear the air compressors running. I'm starting to lose a little air pressure, but it doesn't seem like this machine really minds it all that much. Pretty much just cuts right through it. So 1/8 inch doesn't stand a chance. Now we're going to work up into a piece of 1/4 here. Let's see how 1/4 inch mild steel goes. Yeah, I got to slow down a little bit, but it does cut it. I've got a good plasma stream on the bottom side, and it does cut it fairly nice. Got a little overexcited there towards the end and got a little fast, and it just didn't quite finish it off. We'll get her knocked off here. There it goes. Now that did have a little bit of slag on the backside, but it wasn't bad. So let's see how it pierces 1/4 inch. I got a few sparks in my face for my efforts there, but it did pierce it. So you have to slow it down. You have to slow it down a fair bit with 1/4 inch when you're on the 110 setting, even at maximum amperage. But as you can see, 1/4 inch does fairly well. I was going a little fast there. So now we're set up on 220. I got a full 40 amps. Give this a whirl. Much better. It goes right through that 1/4 inch much more effectively on 220. A little piercing going on there, a little sparks in the face, but it does pierce much better on 220. Noticeable difference. I'll try this piece of 1/2 inch. YesWelder claims it'll cut 1/2 inch on the 220 setting, and by golly, it does. It cuts it. You got to slow down pretty good, but that's to be expected. I mean, you're over twice the thickness, but it does cut through 1/2 inch. You can see it's got a good plasma stream on the bottom side. When the cut was finished, there was a little bit of a slag wall on the back side, but it chipped off really easy. Wasn't an issue. and it just lops it right off. No problems. Let's try piercing. And you can see it will pierce, but it just doesn't like it. It's a little bit too thick to pierce effectively. It will do it. You're guaranteed to get a face full of sparks if you try it. I was wearing a face shield, so it was all right, but it will pierce. It's just not its preferred method. A little too thick for piercing. Okay, we're still set on 220, and we're back to that piece of 3/16, and you can see it just flies through it. 3/16 doesn't have a prayer. A little piercing here with that 3/16. A few sparks in my face, but yes, it pierced it just fine, no problems. Really liking how this machine cuts in the 220 mode. Just really doesn't have a problem. Now we're down to some of this 1/8 inch, just to say we cut it on 220, and yeah, it's like a hot knife through butter. Just flies right through it. Pierces it like nothing, just burns a hole clean through it. It's pretty precise. With some practice, a person could get pretty detailed with it. It's got a very nice, precise plasma stream on it. But again, the 1/8 inch just doesn't have, or the 1/8 inch just doesn't have a prayer. It just flies right through it. And we're just gonna lop it off and clean it up. It's just fun to cut with this thing as fast as it cuts. So now we're going to set up and we're going to do a little bit of stick welding here. I'm staying with 220 because I kept on popping the GFI on my 110 outlet. I think I got a weak GFI. Probably need to replace it. I did try it with my Cut 55 DS and it popped it just as regular. So we're just setting it up here. We're on 220. I'm going to pick up 100 amps, and then I've got 6013 rods with 1/8 inch electrode on it. We're staying in positive electrode mode, so we're going to give it a little whirl here. Now I haven't done a whole lot of stick welding. Now I did speed this up just to shorten up the duration of the video a little bit. So I'm obviously not welding that fast, but you can see it's got a pretty even, stable arc. Not too horribly spattery, but 6013 is pretty good for not creating a whole lot of spatter. It's actually a pretty smooth rod. It does pretty well, and considering how out of practice I am stick welding, it didn't do a half bad job. Pretty happy with it. So same setting, same rod. We're just gonna do a couple of more welds here. Like I said, I'm a little out of practice, so a few practice welds never hurt. I'm keeping everything in position just because my stick welding skills have degraded over the years, because I haven't done a whole lot of stick welding. Actually try to avoid it. It's pretty smoky, pretty messy. Not a big fan of stick welding. It's got its place though. I just don't like doing it. It wasn't too bad of a bead. It's a little wide there, but I had the temperature cranked up pretty high, and it made not a half bad bead. Nice and flat, and obviously had really good penetration, and it just lays a nice bead down with, at least with 6013 rod. It works really, really well. Okay, so now we're going to try a little bit of MIG welding. I've got 7525 gas, and I'm using 035 hardwire. It's the Vulcan hardwire that you get out of Harbor Freight. I've got a couple of pieces of 1/4 inch here, and I've got some 3/16 here that I'm going to weld up. That's about all I've really got for steel scraps that I can weld, but it'll be enough to do. We'll do some MIGging, and then I'll switch out rolls, and we'll do some flux core stuff. So let's go ahead and let's take a couple of pieces of this 3/16 steel here, and we'll do just an overlap joint here, and we'll do a fillet weld. Let me get into my settings here. I'm going to go over and I'm going to select 3/16. All right, let's get a tack on here. Tack's nice. It makes a nice sound. That's okay. That's not too bad. Okay, let's see how this thing welds. So we're set up at 3/16. I'm going to put tack here just because I think I should. And we'll start welding. It's got a nice stable arc. I've got good puddle control. Well, that's not too bad. It's not too bad at all. I'm not terribly happy with their settings for 3/16. I'm actually going to bump it up just a little. Why don't I just go to the 1/4 inch settings and see what that says. Okay, so 1/4 inch is 140 amps with 15 on the wire speed and 16.7 volts. Let's see what the difference is there. Well, that's quite a bit hotter. Oh, I like that much better. So it's a personal preference thing. It will weld with their settings. I just like a little hotter weld. So you can see there, that's the original, that's the settings that they had. And this is, I used the 1/4 inch settings there, and it's just a little more heat. I just like that weld just a little bit better, but I'm kind of used to welding a little hotter anyway. So let's go ahead and let's do another bead with the current settings. Oh yeah, I like that much better. Let's just try a flat weld here and see how it does. Got a tack. This thing tacks really nice. Makes really good tacks. It's a good instant startup. It just really tacks nice. Not a bad weld. A little high. The crown's just a little high. I might be able to back off the wire speed a little. Not too bad. Try bumping the heat up just a little bit. Well, that's much better. It laid down a whole lot better. So yeah, the settings on the welder, they're a little on the cold side, but they're not too bad. Certainly if you're a beginner welder, they'd be good enough to get you started. I'm gonna try bump the heat up a bit here. Let's call it 5/16. Much, much better. So yeah, I would definitely say that on the at least on the 110 setting, the factory settings are just a hair on the cold side for my tastes. I mean, it did weld in its fairness. It did weld, and when I banged the weld apart, it did tear the parent metal. The weld did fine, but my personal preference is a much hotter weld, and yeah. So it's going to take some playing around for you to get used to the settings on this, but you can see that's a much, much, much better weld than that one, and I just ran it up to the hotter settings. So I'm running on the 5/16 settings here, and yeah, what a difference. Huge, huge, huge difference. So let me just play around and see if I can find the sweet spot here. Seems like that's it. So 160 amps with 19 on the wire speed and 19.3 volts. Let's re-weld this and see what she comes out like. Oh, much, much better. Yeah, I like that way more. Boy, it's a nice stable arc. Little spattery. It's a little bit spattery, but oh yeah, much, much, much better. Yeah, so the factory settings or their recommended settings are just a hair on the bit on the cold side. This is way, way, way better. So let's try a fillet just for the fun of it. Still just a little spattery, but I think with some adjustment and some playing around, that can clean up. But oh yeah, way, way, way better. Much, much nicer. Yeah, much, much nicer. That's a good weld. Nice, good heat transfer. I've got decent penetration on it. Yeah, that's hot as hell. Let me see if I can bang this apart. Yeah, it actually bent the steel before the weld actually failed. And yeah, it did a good, it was a nice rip on the parent metal. Yeah, that was good penetration. Yeah, the weld didn't fail. It actually, the steel ripped away before the weld did, which is exactly what it's supposed to do. So no problems there. Yeah, once you get it turned up and you start pouring some heat to it, it welds really good. Wow, that's really, really nice. It's still a little spattery. I'm going to turn the voltage down just a little bit. Oh, there we go. Much better. Yep, much less spatter. So now I'm at 160 amps, 19 on the wire speed, and 19.0 voltage. And the spatter went down considerably. The heat is good. The weld is nice. Got no complaints. Wow, that really does a nice job. So let's just hit it with some 1/4 inch. I'm going to do one side on the 1/4 inch here, and I'm going to save the other side for the flux core. So we'll save that side for flux core. I'm going to drag this weld. And there I've blown the circuit breaker. All right. So that was a really long, hot weld, and it finally kicked out my 110 circuit breaker. Uh, okay, well, that's fair. Let me go reset. Whew. And I'm spent. That was a long day. And it is the end of the day, quite literally. So the question is, at the end of the day, would I buy this welder? Well, let's talk about that really quick. Fit and finish of the machine, I have no complaints. The machine is very well put together. It looks great. It's got just as good a quality as my titanium machine does, and every bit as good a quality as the welders, the Lincolns and the Millers that I've looked at least for out of the box visual inspection of it. It looks really great. It looks like it's put together well. I have no complaints in that department, so I'm very happy with that part of it. Does it cut? Plasma cutter. Absolutely. It cuts well. In fact, it cuts better than my Cut 55 DS does. And I say that because my Cut 55 DS does not tolerate low air pressures at all. As soon as the air compressor starts to kick in and it starts to struggle with air, the machine itself starts to struggle cutting. This one doesn't seem to be nearly as sensitive to that. It's as soon as the air compressor kicks in, it at least lets you cut until you can get to a point where you want to stop, and it doesn't completely pizzle out on you. So I'm actually much happier with the way this plasma cutter cuts as opposed to my Cut 55 DS, just due to the fact that it's less sensitive to low air pressure. And I tell you what, I cut in 110 and 220. It didn't like 110 because I think I've got a weak GFI. As soon as I would be cutting for like 15 seconds, it would pop the GFI right away. And I actually took my Cut 55 out there and I tried that out, and it was doing the same thing. It was popping the GFI. So I think I've got a weak GFI. I need to replace it. So then it did cut in 110. I just kept on popping the GFI all the time. So then I reverted over to 220, and I tell you what, it goes right up through half inch just like it advertises it does. And I think it would go a little thicker than half inch. I just didn't have any half inch that I had to laying around that I could cut up. So it cuts very, very nice. I'm very happy with the way it cuts. And I like the cone and the consumables just a little bit better than the Cut 55 DS, and the fact that the consumables are readily available other places other than YesWelder. Like that aspect of it very, very much. So yes, it cuts. Very happy with the plasma cutter. Welding. How does it weld? Well, let's talk about stick first. I didn't do any 110 stick welding because of the aforementioned weak GFI, but in 220, this thing will burn some sticks, and it'll weld just fine, and it'll weld better than me. We'll put it that way. I haven't had to do any serious stick welding for quite a period of time, but I was able to get it done once I got a few practice passes and I started to get my rhythm back and started to get the feel for it again. I was welding pretty decent with it, and in 220 it'll burn some welds, and it does a really, really nice job of stick welding. I was using 6013 rods, 1/8 inch electrode, and within my limited capabilities and my out of practice stick welding, it did fairly well stick welding. I have no complaints about that whatsoever. I will continue to do some stick welding. I've got those rods. I'll just practice. One day I'll just go out there and I'll start practicing and see if I can get myself a little better. But as I get older and my eyes get a little more out of whack and I start getting a little shakier, can't hold the electrodes quite as steady as I used to, my stick welding has suffered over the years. MIG welding, every bit as good as my titanium. Let's just come right out and say it. It welds great. It really does. Once I started off at the factory settings, and the factory settings do work. They're just a little cold for my taste. As soon as I bumped up the heat a little bit, it was much, much better. Mess with the voltage just a hair, and I was able to get rid of some of the spatter, and it really smoothed out. It's got a nice stable arc. I don't have that soft start issue like I've got in my titanium. It just instantly starts hitting the welding right away. It's smooth. I really have no complaints about it, and I'm really excited to continue using it. Like I said, initial impressions are is it cuts every bit as good as my titanium does, and I'm really excited. I'm going to take my titanium off the cart. I'm going to put it on the shelf for a little while, and I'm going to use this one for the next few months just to see how it holds up and to make sure that the trend continues. Really happy with the MIG welding feature on this. core wire, I didn't have any core wire. I swear to God, I thought I had a spool of core wire, a 1-pounder, and then when I got to looking at it, the 1-pounder is actually hardwire. So it's, what do you do? So I didn't get a chance to core weld with it, but I have no reason to believe it wouldn't core weld just fine. And I will try the TIG function on it as well, even though I completely suck at TIG welding. I'll give it a try. I'll get my argon filled up and we'll give it a whirl. But I didn't do the TIG welding either. So with the welding that I did do with it and the cutting that I did do with it, what are my impressions of the machine? Very good. Every bit as good as my titanium. The plasma cutter being integrated into the machine is an excellent added bonus. And let's do the math. If you go to Harbor Freight and you buy a titanium, which is a 200 amp multi-process machine, just like this one is, you're looking at $800 plus right now they're selling for, if you can even get them. Plus, if you want to get a plasma cutter, you're looking at no less than another $500, and that's for the cheap Chicago Electric crap. And those aren't real great plasma cutters. They will cut, but they're not great. So you're looking at no less than $1,300 to get a plasma cutter and a 200 amp multi-process welder at Harbor Freight. YesWelder selling this one for $99.99, $999.99. And you're actually saving money right off the get-go, and you're saving space because you have 2 units in one box. Really excited about that. Really tickled to start working with this thing and see how it goes. I've been using the titanium for a little over a year now, so I'm just gonna use this one instead for a while and see how it works out. Would I recommend buying it to anybody? Absolutely. With the impressions that I've got today, I've got no problem recommending that. Ask me in 6 months, we'll see how it holds up. Ask me in a year, we'll see how it holds up. But first initial impressions, very happy with the machine, and I'm excited to continue using it. And I'm not saying this just because, well, YesWelder sent me the machine. I didn't need another welder. I've got one, and it works just fine. I have no complaints with it. But they did send me one, and they asked me to review it. They're not paying me. They did give me a discount code, which I will put in the description down below. So if you do order one of these, I please ask you to use that discount code because it does give me a little bit of a kickback. I don't make much on it, but every little bit helps. But if you do order this welder, please use that discount code because it does help me and it does help the channel out. With that, let's get this thing wrapped up. If you like this content and you like what you're seeing on this channel, you'd be doing me a huge favor by making sure you hit that like and subscribe button down below. Make sure you ring that notification bell so you get notified of upcoming videos. Hit me with comments. The comments really help the algorithms, and I really try to answer as many comments as I possibly can. So that all helps the channel out exponentially, and I really do appreciate my subscribers. This is Ed with Jack of All Trades. Once again, thanks for riding along, and we will see you on the next video. Little tech tip for you: when you're installing the wire into your welder, this machine actually has a jog feature on it. In other words, it will feed the wire faster without squeezing the trigger, and it's this left button right here. You just push and hold it, and it'll send the wire through much faster. So a little tech tip for you: that's how you load your wire.